Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of day 2 on RIM Professional Development and Aspire. Today we have an exciting session on effective virtual meetings. But before I introduce our speaker today, I'd like to thank our sponsor, BMS CAT. BMS CAT understands that customers have usually suffered a severe loss, and their goal is in that every loss, it is to help the property owner by providing exceptional service and to control the associated costs. Services at a fair price is the prime element of BMS CAT strives for in all their projects. Thank you again to BMS CAT for their sponsorship, which allows us to bring this session to you free. Now on to the session. Today we have Christy Robinson. Christy has more than 20 years of experience as an information technology consultant, leading diverse global projects teams with a consistent focus on maximizing collaboration and knowledge sharing. She has designed several data transformations to cloud services with an emphasis on governance, sustainability, and information life cycle management. Her work includes policy, process, and project management, along with training and communications, development, and delivery. Her IT experience covers a breadth of topics, including UX, UI design, change management for people and systems, and user adoption guidance. She was a compliance session moderator at Microsoft's 2020 Ignite conference. Please join me in welcoming Christy. Christy, how are you
Good
doing?
morning. Good morning, Rishi. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for ARMA's Metro New York City chapter, for providing this opportunity to speak at your Spring Confirm conference. And especially pleased to be speaking for the Aspire track, which is, I think, something that has been instrumental. An avenue along those lines has been instrumental in helping me prepare and present to the public on certain topics. Today's meeting is all about effective virtual meetings. And I think initially it was going to be about Zoom meetings, but there are so many different platforms. The logos at the left indicate just some of the more common platforms that we're using in video conferencing today. This Socio platform for event presentation, I have found it very nice from a participant standpoint, being able to view a presentation and have the chat and then have access to the information on the speakers below. That's pretty neat. What we'll talk about today is leveling up your virtual meeting participation and facilitation from today's world, which is work from anywhere, which it could be home, or some people are fortunate to work from a beach somewhere or a cabin in the woods. Excuse me. My name is Christy Robinson, and I consult for Mori Global and for Paint Rock Consulting Services. And I've got my Twitter handle at the bottom, along with that of ARMA's for this conference, and a few hashtags to use as well. With that, there we go. Hang on. Bear with me a moment while I manage my slide. There we go. Okay, sorry. So we're going to focus on two areas, best practices for participation and for facilitation. So for participation, the priority here is to participate. If you're invited to a meeting, if you're included in a meeting, your voice is meant to be at that table. So be engaged and make sure that you have a fluency with the platform tools. So if it's in a platform that you've utilized before, please feel free to try that out or test it out in your computer with your settings prior to going live on your presentation. You probably still will encounter some technical hiccups. That's just normal, but you'll be better prepared to manage them or be flexible around them. From a presentation or from a participation standpoint, being prompt is, I think it's a given. I think we've gotten very lazy about that, and especially with the proliferation of virtual meetings in the last year. But it's good to exercise maybe the diligence in making sure a meeting ends properly, and so that you can start the next one properly. Excuse me. Now, Understanding your tools is important from a participant standpoint because they're all different. And this is my first time using the Socio app, event management app, and while I really like it, I still had a few little hiccups this morning in setting up. So being able to understand what those might be and being able to manage them is key to your engagement in a meeting. And then also, most platforms have either a chat or a raise your hand option. So sometimes there are large presentations where everybody's muted except for the speaker, and you have a button to click where you can raise your hand for questions or conversation. Um, that lets the speaker know that you're waiting. You have a question, you have some input and engagement, and that you want to contribute to the meeting. That lets them kind of manage bringing you into the conversation. And also be judicious with chat. So if you are in a meeting with a team of people that you don't know, that might not be the best place to try out your new GIF or your new joke. Um, Use the chat that is in a way that's appropriate with the goals of the meeting and the attendees in the meeting. And then, oops, I forgot to use my mouse for that. And then also maximize your tools. So once you have a fluency and a familiarity with the platform, make the effort to maximize your tool set. So over time, you'll develop a preference if you have earbuds or an open array microphone. Maybe you have a podcast set up. Headphones like these can be lifesavers. The reason that I wear a headphone is because at any given time the doorbell could ring and the dog could go crazy, and it could be chaos. But my headset will minimize that audio and sound interruption uh, to some degree to make it manageable both for me and other people who are in my meeting, especially if I'm not muted. That brings us to our mute thing. So I think all of the presentation platforms has a mute option. Um, Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. That will eliminate the potential for any interruption from background noise or chaos. Um, the thing that is hardest for me to remember along those lines, though, is to remember to unmute myself. I don't know how many times a week I start speaking in a group meeting and have to be reminded to unmute myself. So that's something I need to work on. And it's one of those things that just takes practice and time. The other recommendation is to be fully present and engaged in your meeting. I know it's tempting, really tempting, when you're working from home, especially, and your office is in your home, and you're surrounded by the work that's waiting for you, or the things that you haven't done yet, or other things that are clamoring for your attention. I can appreciate how tempting that is if you're in a meeting and you're a participant, and maybe you're just a listening participant, maybe not necessarily an active participant. But I would still recommend to be fully present and engaged in the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is usually set out in the agenda with some goals and objectives. And your job as a participant is to engage in the meeting in a way that supports the presenter in meeting those goals and objectives, or supports being able to communicate those goals and objectives or develop those as part of the meeting. So if you're doing something else, that will take some of your attention away from engagement in the meeting. Now, my caveat, I always have caveats. My caveat with this, however, is that you'll want to be, if you are multitasking, there are cases when that is essential in virtual meetings. So if you're hosting a virtual meeting, if you're participating in a virtual meeting that is working to solve a problem or drive an initiative or what have you, oftentimes there are going to be associated tasks with your meeting. So for example, perhaps corralling questions or helping with chat, or maybe taking some of your own notes and action items to take away from the meeting. So my caveat is multitasking during a virtual meeting is fine as long as it is in the service of that meeting. or that client. Other times it just really leads to a bit of a distraction. Now, I know that we have comments on the Socio platform, and I don't think I have those toggled to where I can see them just yet. So pardon that. But what I'd like to ask is, and forgot to mention at the beginning, is that for anybody who has questions, please keep your questions at hand, write them down, or maybe put them in the comments. I can't see those just yet at the moment, but we'll have time at the end of our presentation to discuss some of the questions that you might have one-on-one or live. So let me get through the slide deck here, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions or provide any recommendations that anybody might have. Now, our next slide is still focused on participation. That is around technical considerations. So in the previous slide, we talked about being familiar with the platform, maximizing what you can do with that, and then also being aware of your tools and what you can do or can't do with those. Next, we'll talk about joining a meeting. So, if it's a new platform or software, please make time to test it out before you join it live. That still may not iron out any of the bugs or wrinkles that you identify, but it will make you more comfortable in accessing and utilizing that technology. It also gives you the opportunity to test out your equipment. So if you are using a podcasting microphone and a Bluetooth speaker, for example, and in this new platform you can hear a lot of background noise, or it's not quite to your liking, you will have time to typically change your setup. Maybe you want to use a headset, or if you use earbuds or something different, that will give you time to go in and adjust the settings on your platform so that you can be as best engaged as possible as a participant. The other thing I'd recommend is introductions. Consider joining a meeting a little bit early so that you can troubleshoot anything if needed. And then also providing the space to just say a few hellos as you're joining a meeting. One of the things that we miss in virtual meetings is that human connection that we enjoy so much in face-to-face meetings or conferences. And one way to slightly bring that thread back into the scheme of things is to provide a general hello or introduction when you're joining a meeting. That may not necessarily be appropriate in big broadcast type sessions where some person is presenting through a bullhorn to an audience that's receiving everything. But if you're going to be a participant, I would recommend taking the time to introduce yourself and say hello. I got into this habit, I want to say about a year ago, when COVID shutdowns started really taking place around the globe and more people were working from home. That put a huge stress on all the networks that provided virtual meeting and collaboration connectivity. It also put a huge stress on global network and information communication networks, broadband networks, internet capacity. So oftentimes a year ago, it might take you 5 minutes before you're able to build up enough bandwidth to connect to a meeting. And what that creates for the participant is a level of anxiety, maybe frustration. The beginning of the shutdowns a year ago was a hugely stressful event for everybody. So being able to join early, iron out any difficulties, and then being a friendly voice of greeting creates a much easier environment for stressed out people to join. Even if they're a little bit late and they're worried that they're joining late, it makes it a friendlier situation for them to enter into after having faced some initial frustrations in joining your meeting. Puts people at ease, and it makes it a much easier place to start from with your meeting. That's not so much the case now, because thankfully all of the platforms and service providers seem to have really rushed up their investment and implementation in expanding these networks. So for the most part, we can join pretty quickly and easily and don't necessarily need 10 minutes to join a meeting. But I still recommend being there early or on time so that you can do those friendly introductions. The other question that comes into play a lot is whether or not to use video, sharing video or not. There are a few things to consider here. From a participation standpoint, I would like to recommend, not everybody does this, but I work with one group who does this, and I really have come to like it, that this group meets regularly, and when they start their meetings, they start it with the cameras on, which is great. There's usually not a bandwidth problem or issue there, but it gives everybody in the meeting who are knowing each other more and more over time, but it gives them that virtual or that digital human connection that they're not able to get in person. Um, and then once the meeting gets underway, this group tends to turn off their video. So the person who's speaking or presenting will turn theirs on, and it just becomes a natural flow. Whoops, sorry about that. Let me go back. Will this let me go back? There. That becomes a natural flow for the participants in the meeting to turn on or off their video. It helps also from a participation standpoint to focus the attention on the screen to either the topic that's being discussed or the person who's presenting that topic. There are introverts among us. I count myself as one of them, who maybe don't have a comfort level with turning on video, or perhaps uh, their surroundings aren't as amenable to turning on video. Maybe they're working from home with equipment that doesn't have a webcam, or they're working from a very crowded environment and don't feel confident in showing their background. Those are all fine considerations. So make video an option as opposed to a choice so that it doesn't feel like you're potentially excluding any of your participants. And then finally, to blur or not blur your backgrounds. I've seen this to varying degrees of success. I know a lot of platforms offer that opportunity. I think Google Meet or Google Suites has a neat option where you can turn on like a minor blur versus a major blur. I like the minor blur a little bit, but oftentimes what happens with the blur is, or a background setting, is that is a digital image behind you, and then your camera is capturing your live, you know, presence in front of that digital image. So if you don't move around a lot, um, and also this might sound funny, but it's true. If you have curly hair, um, if you have straight hair and don't move around a lot, using blurs or backgrounds is great because it just works. But if you happen to be someone who sways in your chair a little bit, or you have really curly hair, which I do on non-straight hair days, then you'll see what I like to call the pixel halo effect. So what your camera is doing in real time while you're moving, or if you have contours in your hair, then your camera is constantly adjusting to appreciate where you are in the picture and placing you in front of that digital image. So oftentimes you will see a little bit of a pixelated type halo appearance around your head. And sometimes it looks like you're trying to outrun your background. You know, if you move your head really fast, it takes a few seconds of lag, you know, and you can see the background for a second or so until the AI behind putting you in front of a digital image catches up. So that's just an observation I've had. But use it and find out what your preferences are so that you can be a seamless participant in virtual meetings and not be too concerned with, you know, fixating on what your background may or may not look like. Excuse me. Okay. So we've touched on participation best practices, and that is knowing your equipment, knowing your platform, and making sure that you're fully engaged in the meetings that you're asked to be a voice within. Now we'll switch it over to facilitation. Best practices, we'll go along the same lines. We'll cover best practices and equipment considerations or technical considerations. But probably the priority focus here is to make sure that you provide a positive experience for everybody. It's understood. Sometimes meetings are going to be difficult. Sometimes they're going to be challenging because you're working through a difficult situation. It might be difficult to make sure people are engaged in the same manner. But as a facilitator or host, it's your goal. Besides meeting the agenda and meeting needs, it's your goal to make this a positive experience for everybody who's going to be participating. And there are several ways to do that. So, in terms of your skill outward, be an engaging and fantastic host. That can mean a lot of things. It means understanding your audience and the reason for your meeting, the goals and objectives for your meeting, and making everybody feel welcome. This is important not just as a participant, but especially as a facilitator to ensure that everybody feels a similar level of welcome into the environment in lieu of that human interaction. It's also very important to have a deputy in many cases. Call it maybe a scribe. I think that maybe is demeaning sounding. I like to call it a deputy. But this role is basically your partner in the presentation. This person can make or break your presentation facilitation or hosting. So as you're hosting a meeting, if there's going to be dialogue or questions or interaction with your participants, having a deputy on hand can ensure that that goes smoothly so that you can still focus on being a host, getting your meeting objectives met, making sure that participants have a positive experience, while your deputy is also making sure that your meeting goals and objectives are being met and keeping you on track so they can help you better understand where topics are maybe encountering friction, if there are lots of questions that are being handled or presented as part of that portion of your presentation, being able to take follow-up actions, for example, and then be sure that you follow up. Deputies can be essential to good meetings, especially if you are presenting to a large group or you're facilitating a discussion to a large group or organization. And then, like with participation, be prepared and open early. This is essential because more so in a facilitation role than a participation role. In a facilitation role, you are like the greeter at a restaurant, or you are like the host at a party. You want to make sure everybody feels welcome and invited in to join your environment, even if it's a big presentation, which in a later case you might mute all of the participants. You still want to engage with them as they join your effort, because let's face it, they didn't have to. There are very few meetings that are absolutely do or die essential. So providing that welcome for participants is going to position them to be already prepared to be more engaged in your particular meeting. Whoops, I'm not sure how I did that. I clicked on something wrong. Here we go. Can you see? I might need a little technical help. There we go. Great. Okay. Sorry about that. Now, whoops, let's click one more time. There we go. So, pardon my technical difficulties. It is my first time using the Socio Event app. My apologies. Thanks for your patience. So facilitation best practices, besides being a great host or facilitator, also means you've got to do a bit of back work on the planning side of things. So if you are planning on hosting a meeting and require or would like engagement across all of your attendees, be sure to build an effective agenda. You want to state right off of the bat on your agenda, what the goals of this meeting are, what you want to be the results of this meeting, even if it's going to be follow-up actions or more activity, or just make sure that people understood what you delivered. building that agenda and understanding your participants is going to help you also identify where you might have some time zone variations. So I understand with this particular group, we have, especially yesterday, participants from around the world, and that's a lot of time zone management. Sometimes you might not be able to manage that, but if you are managing or facilitating a meeting that crosses multiple time zones within your country, plan for those so that you don't inadvertently have people trying to join your meeting at 3 a.m. Because they probably won't. If you want their voices heard, enable them to be a participant at the table. Another thing to think of is accessibility. So I want to say maybe a year ago, there weren't that many accessibility options available, but they really have been ramping up. So where you can in your presentations, if you're going to have a PowerPoint or handout, be sure to include alternate text. So for people who may be seeing or visually impaired, or might have to look at enlarged experiences, this gives them a way to better understand your icons or your imagery in your presentation. Most platforms have closed captioning, which is live. It's amazing what we can do today with technology. So it's live and it's real time, which means it's also a little bit error prone. But many platforms have the ability to just turn on live closed captioning. When it's live, I think most people understand that it can be a little bit error prone. But if this is a feature that you turn on, be sure to maybe speak a little bit more slowly and enunciate a little bit more clearly. And that will minimize the errors. They're still going to happen. I had a meeting recently where I wanted to make it a point that it should be a fun experience for everybody involved, but the closed captioning displayed that, in text at the bottom of the screen for every single participant, that I wanted them to have fun constipation. That's not what we want to have happen. So be forgiving if you're in an environment that uses closed captioning, but utilize it so that because especially if you don't know your whole audience, to accommodate for those who may be hearing impaired, or in an environment where maybe their equipment might not be able to hear you as well as their screen may be able to present you. And it also provides an engagement for people, especially if in a global presentation, for people who are in different regions of the world where perhaps English is their second, third, or fourth, or fifth language. Uh, it would just provide an additional bridge between you and your participants to ensure that they feel welcome and feel compelled to engage in your presentation. The last piece here is engaging broad participation. So the extroverts among us might not need that much requirement or coaching to engage in virtual meetings. In fact, without being at the table, they may feel a little bit of relief where they can take a deep breath and be more engaged in participating in your meeting, instead of perhaps being, the connector person or the greeting person, or however they might normally engage in a meeting. Where you might need to put in some effort, though, is engaging your introverts. Um, I am an introvert, but I love doing presentations. I prefer to do them behind a monitor. Otherwise, you'll see my knee kind of do this. Yeah, it's quite embarrassing to see. But if I'm behind a monitor, I feel like I can handle um, impromptu changes or disruptions or things a little bit more readily. And that is a great opportunity for you to reach out to either introverts or perhaps different groups in your audience that you might not otherwise hear from. So if you're presenting and facilitating a meeting to a large organization, let's say there are different business units present. Maybe there's an IT organization, a legal organization representation, governance representation. Um, if you don't know the people directly, encourage those groups and call them out. So if you have questions or points of engagement that you'd like to highlight, ask if this makes sense to the legal organization on the call, and go through those discussion points. You're going to discover possibly some issues that you might not otherwise have known about had you not coaxed that bit of conversation. And it also affirms to the audience that you are meaningfully providing a bridge to them to be able to participate in your meeting. And that just improved engagement creates a better product at the end. And the more ways that you can provide that as a facilitator, whether through your platform or your network, the better. Okay, technical considerations. This is where, as you being a facilitator or a host, hosting a meeting, besides developing a strong agenda, making sure that you are accommodating to people's locations and communication needs, and making sure that you have that agenda that supports what your objectives are for the meeting. We don't want to waste anybody's time. I think people probably are not at a loss for which meetings they they have an option to attend or not. Oftentimes they're double booked and things. So making it an effective meeting as a host will make it more effective for everybody else who's participating. So from a hosting standpoint, we've mentioned before, be familiar with your platform. My apologies for my lack of familiarity with the Socio platform. This is the first time I've worked with this platform from a presenter standpoint. But from an attendee standpoint, I really like the way that you have the information about the whole rest of the ARMA conference at your fingertips, information about the speakers, the presenters, the other participants who are in a particular presentation, and the chat window at the side. I think that's a fantastic platform. Um, Other video considerations. So you may not know if there are going to be restraints or constraints on your technology until you get your session going. And if that's the case, start with video, but be prepared to scale back if you need to. This is also where your deputy can come in handy. If your deputy is participating in your meeting as a participant, they may be able to see issues that you're not aware of as a presenter. So, for example, perhaps your background is so cluttered it's distracting to the participants. Your your deputy can help you with things like that, and that would be a decision whether or not you want to blur or not blur your background to more focus the purpose of your meeting. If there are issues in bandwidth, or sometimes you see people's mouths moving but you hear the words come a few minutes later, in that case, you might want to pare back your video presentations. So you might recommend to participants that feel free to turn off your video when you're not speaking. Encourage them to turn on video when they are speaking. Um, and then some platforms have a together mode. I'm speaking about Teams. I think Google Meet does too. I'm sure many others do as well. These are the ones I use more frequently. But for example, in Microsoft Teams, there's a together mode, which shows kind of auditorium seating or like lecture hall seating. What it will do is the technology behind that creates a static image of a background with chairs. And then from each of the video participants, all that it takes from your video feed real time is kind of the outline of your head and shoulders. So instead of creating a screen with 50 windows that have 50 people with all their different backgrounds, which could be varying and taxing on bandwidth, what Together Mode does is create a static image and then just beam in the heads of all of the participants, which greatly maximizes bandwidth and technical resources. Um, and then if need be, turn off video. If you start with video and have that opportunity to make an introduction and to make people feel welcome, that goes a long way. People are understanding if there are connectivity issues or background noise or interference issues. People are understanding if you need to turn off the video. So feel free to do that, but have the capacity, have the flexibility as a presenter to be ready to go any of those directions at any time. Um, I think that's one of the key things for being a good facilitator or a good host is being adaptable and able to change direction on a dime, because things happen. Life happens. At any minute, my doorbell could ring, my dog could go crazy, and there's nothing that I could do about that except manage how I react to that, and minimize the impact that might have on the meeting participants. So, some instances, thanks for the 10 minutes left, some instances where we've seen this happen in real life recently are the "I am not a cat" video. I think probably everybody's seen this. It's also interesting that the 394th Judicial District Court of Texas has do not broadcast, or recording is prohibited. But then they themselves broadcast and broadcast through their own YouTube channel. So that might be something that might need some word revamping. Another example, this is from about a year ago, right when everybody was moving, 90 miles an hour to get onto video platforms. The "My boss is a potato." This was a case where a lady shared her computer with her children, and they like to use Snapchat filters. And one of them just left that on the meeting settings. So the woman, when she joined her work meeting, was unfortunately displayed as a potato underground. That's You have to admit that's a little bit funny. That's fantastic for your happy hour calls or friendly communications, but maybe not so much in a meeting. A few other considerations are these are real things that happen that I've either done or experienced. You can hear these things if you don't mute your microphone. That's why I stress muting your microphone as much as possible and then remembering to unmute. Um, these are all very interesting sounds in the background of a meeting. They may not be very appropriate. It all depends on your audience and your participants, but be flexible. These things are going to happen. You'll notice them when they happen, and they'll make you a better presenter or participant in the future if you experience them. If you experience these things, because they will make you not want to experience them again. Um, and then, excuse me, for a few closing thoughts, virtual meetings are here to stay. Some organizations, some companies are moving back kind of into a hybrid environment where there's going to be some office days and some virtual days. I would imagine that's going to expand greatly over time. Be flexible. Both be patient with yourself and with the other participants in your meeting. It might be frustrating to hear a dog in the background, but this is life today, and it's going to get better. But dealing with those sorts of interesting components to meetings today is only going to make you a better participant and facilitator in the future. Um, and then finally, practice. You may not want to be a facilitator in your meetings at work just yet. If you haven't had that opportunity, make your voice heard. Talk with your management, raise your hand, offer to host meetings, offer to facilitate meetings. And then to gain more practice, maybe do that in a family, home, or friend setting. Host happy hour, host family meetings, and it will become second nature to you in no time. So I think we've actually come up close on our hour. I don't see any of the comments. I don't think I can see those at the moment. So my apologies for not actually answering any of your questions live. But I will take comments that if we can collect them from this presentation, and I'd be happy to provide responses to those through the Socio event platform.
Hi, hi, Chrissy.
Thank you.
There's actually I don't see any questions just yet. If anybody
Okay,
has any,
great.
I'm happy to show them up on the screen. So
Okay. Well, gosh, that's a little scary if nobody has questions. That means either I went too simple or too redundant. Oh, great. Zoom bombing. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Great question. Um, manage security and controls. So, like for this Socio event, you had to register and you were provided a link to enter. If you're hosting or participating in a Zoom meeting, if you're hosting it, provide a link for people to enter and a password to join so that you can prevent those random Zoom bombers. Um, if you're participating in a meeting where those controls aren't in place, I mean, We're information governance people. We are the people who should speak up and make those recommendations. So if you're in a meeting where you notice the host doesn't have those, or a meeting on your calendar in the future doesn't have those type of controls, feel free to recommend them to that meeting organizer. Maybe they hadn't had a Zoom bombing experience in the past. Maybe they haven't had a reason to put those controls into place. Don't let a Zoom bombing incident be the reason that they put those controls in place. Good question, Faith. Thank you. Okay, well, I sure appreciate the opportunity, Rishi, to speak and participate in the ARMA conference, the Confirm New York City and ARMA Metro New York, for being able to be a voice for the Aspire track in your spring conference this
I,
year.
I did just have one question that just came in from
Yes.
our esteemed Lauren
Oh,
Barnes. What is the etiquette
yes.
with muting fellow participants?
So as a host, most platforms will give you that opportunity to meet the participants or to mute the audience kind of in bulk. I recommend doing that, but not until you've had time for your introductions. Welcome your people, make them feel comfortable, give them a friendly place to be starting their meeting from, and then when you really get started, that's a good point to mute your participants if it's a broadcast session. If it's something that's going to be more collaborative in nature, then muting all of your participants might not be an option. You may want to do that at the beginning, but announce to them that everybody's been muted for the sake of starting off cleanly, but then when they do wish to speak, to unmute themselves. So there are a couple of ways that you can go. Good question, Lauren. And she is a perfect segue for moving into the next session, which is going to be more panel style. Lauren and a group of other experts are going to talk in more detail and I think have more of a collaborative environment on doing fantastic rock star presentations, hosting them, participating in them, and just making sure that you can do them at your best level in this rapidly changing environment. So I think with
Christy,
that,
thank you very much. I appreciate it. You actually
thank
were
you, Rishi.
great. The information was very informative. I'm
Great.
sure I'm not the only one that have experienced sessions or Zoom sessions rather where someone forgot to mute themselves, and we probably heard some unsightly words or certain things that we probably wish we could forget. Just as a reminder to everyone, this session was sponsored by BMS CAT. For those interested, we do have a quick break before the next session at 11 that Christy mentioned. So please take a moment to visit the sponsors and connect. Again, Christy, on behalf of the ARMA Metro NYC board, thank you very much for being presented today.
Thank you very much, Rishi, and to the ARMA NYC board. Have a great day.
You too.